Cool. Here we go live. So welcome everyone to Meshery development meeting. Today is 7th of June. And if you haven't got a chance to introduce yourself, feel free to sound off and give a quick introduction. I see one newcomer in participants list. So Abid, Sophie, hi, welcome to the call. Is this your first time joining this call? Would like to introduce?
I always get a kick out of how there's no ice breaking. There's just, wait a second, are you new here? All right, we'll just put you on the spot right away. Just say something, anything, just introduce yourself. Anyway, oh yeah, is it Abid Sophie? Is that who we might get to harass today? That's great. So by the way, is Abid Sophie, is that generally a masculine or feminine name? Is that a guy or a girl? Maybe that'll get, oh, they're on, they don't have audio. Never mind. So I guess that's not going to work.
All right.
Oh, so, hi, Abid. Sorry, Gaurav.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Oh, good. So Abid, Sophie, your audio might have just connected. We were just talking about you. And we were wondering if you had been on the call before, and if you haven't, that you might just say hi to everybody.
Hi, me. Yeah, it's my first call here on the app. I just jumped here like last day, right on the Linux Foundation website, your project, and I'm trying to contribute in some way. So I was like going through the issues in the afternoon, and I found one that you assigned to me today. I was just working on that one.
What? It's not done? What's going on?
Yeah, actually, I just started now on that. It was like, I think it's a small thing, like doing the changing it from linear gradient to the radial gradient. It's like for UI thing.
Oh yeah, thanks for picking that up. That I don't know why no one suggested that before. It's a hexagon, so if we're going to use a gradient, you know, it's like it feels pretty natural that it might be a radial gradient. So yeah, I think you're going to have a winner there. That's good.
Yeah.
Oh, nice. All right. Well, by the way, you said you enunciated Abid. Is that about right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, okay. All right. All right. Fair enough. Abid, very nice to have you. Thanks for taking on an issue already. I mean,
yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
Cool. That's great. So before we get rolling, if you got a webcam and some clothes on, feel free to open your webcam. Don't be shy. So we have a decent list of agenda today. So we'll be going over every item. And before we start, so if you haven't started Meshery repository yet, this is your time. Go and give it a star. Share it with your friends, family, friends of friends, everywhere. And next up is publish your first design. So if you haven't published your first design onto the Meshery catalog, make sure you publish that. We'll be sending out a tweet from Meshery IO's Twitter handle. And if you face any difficulties and you don't know how to publish your design on catalog, we are working on some user-facing documentation and tutorials. So we'll be coming up with that. And till then, you can ask any questions on Discuss Forum or on Slack. So, all right. So let's move forward with today's first agenda. That's from Abdullah on design spec connections state machine. Abdullah, are you all set to share?
Yeah.
Cool.
Assuming my screen is visible and all of you can hear me. To give a bit of background, so Meshery manages many different kinds of resources. A resource can be a Kubernetes cluster or maybe an application within the cluster or any Meshery adapter that may be deployed in the cluster. So every resource that Meshery is aware of can be considered as a connection. Currently, there isn't a proper way to manage and observe the status of these connections. So if we were to go into the Meshery UI, when we can see that we're connected to a cluster, but unless we ping the cluster, we wouldn't know if the cluster is still up or not. And similarly, when it comes to other resources like maybe any components within the cluster that MeshSync discovers, we're not really sure about the actual state of the component in the cluster. So hence we would require a connection state machine to keep track of what state a connection is in, and to keep track of what state a connection is in, and some goals that the connection state machine would solve is that we would be it would become easier to solve the manage the state of the Kubernetes clusters. It would managing the state of the components discovered by MeshSync within a cluster would become easier. So what is to give a bit of background on MeshSync? MeshSync helps Meshery synchronize with the state of the Kubernetes cluster and discover anything that might be deployed within the cluster. And based on the connection, once we have a connection state machine, we can add extensibility to it so that based on any state changes that might occur, we might provision certain workflows. So these were the high-level design goals. When it comes to objectives, so firstly, the first objective would be that we want the management of Meshery operator deployed in Kubernetes clusters. So whenever the Meshery server is started, the Meshery goes through all the clusters in a kubectl and deploys Meshery operators to all of the clusters discovered in the config. But it might not be the case that the user would want an operator to be deployed in all of these clusters. So if you have a...
Oh, I apologize for interrupting. I just figured if you wouldn't mind, if you have any visualizations that you might show to people just to help make sure that the other 30 people that are on the call are kind of tracking with you, and then maybe go into, drive some of those specifics from there. If they're done in Crayola crayons, even better. Crayons usually explain it pretty well to me, so yeah.
Fine. Yeah, okay, so this is a pretty good diagram to explain what Meshery operator does. So Meshery manages Kubernetes clusters through the use of a Meshery operator. And whenever the Meshery server is started, it goes to a kubeconfig file, and wherein it finds what clusters it has available, wherein it finds what clusters it can get access to, and deploys a Meshery operator in every single one of those clusters. But a user might not necessarily want an operator to be deployed in every single cluster. And sometimes he might choose to ignore a few clusters. So if given that we have a connection state machine, it gives us it would give us the ability to do that. It would give the user the ability to decide what clusters he wishes to work with, what clusters he wishes to ignore, and it would make it easy for him to transition the clusters between those states. Something similar can be said about the resources discovered by MeshSync as well. And MeshSync is nothing but helps in the discovery of components within a cluster. Another objective towards this effort would be the credential management for mesh models. To give some background on mesh models help model the components within the cluster. So so whatever components that a MeshSync might discover within a cluster, we model them for Meshery using mesh models. And to transition these components between states, there might be some authentication involved in that process. So for that, we would like to implement credential management for mesh models. And as I've mentioned before, every single one of these state transitions, and there is a possibility of having some workflows that might be listening for these transitions in state. And based on that, we can execute some tasks. Coming to the diagram. So firstly, this is the state diagram for the Kubernetes cluster connections. So once a cluster once a cluster is discovered, the user would have the option there would be a register option in the UI, and a user can choose to either connect to the cluster or ignore it. And after he's connected to the cluster, he might choose to disconnect it later, or once after he has ignored the cluster, he might choose to delete it. And similarly, after being connected, he might choose to delete it later, and so on. So this diagram outlines the different states that a user can transition the cluster into. And similarly, for components within the cluster, we have this state diagram for mesh sync, and each of these yellow boxes denote extension points where we can have a workflow engine listening to and trigger workflows based on any one of these state changes. So this is some of the states that we think of having. So we can have a discovered state. So whenever we discover a resource, we can have that resource in a discovered state. We can have a registered state, as well as a connected state, and an ignored state if we do not wish to work with the resource currently, and a disconnected state, as well as a deleted and a not found state. Does anyone have any questions or queries?
Yeah, I thought there were a couple of interesting points within here. Well, I mean, one of the things that you were saying is that, I mean, boy, man, you said a mouthful. Just that the way that Meshery, its internal object model is referred to as MeshModel. It's just a logical model, logical set of resources that Meshery uses to define the objects that it's managing. Now, I think you were saying some of those objects that it manages, it establishes specific connections to. And the Kubernetes cluster is an example of one of the types of managed elements that Meshery will connect to. When Meshery connects to a Kubernetes cluster, it will automatically deploy the Meshery operator. And sometimes it's really, really helpful to users, so they don't have to wait around to get insight as to what's going on in their cluster. Other times, it's undesired that Meshery would actually deploy an operator. It might be that they want Meshery to be aware of the Kubernetes cluster, but they would like to manage the status of that connection between Meshery and Kubernetes. So they want to have some more control over that. An example being maybe not to deploy the Meshery operator. So part of the gist of what you're saying is, that each of these connections that Meshery has to managed elements, there should be state management. There should be a status of that connection. Okay. Different types of infrastructure that Meshery connects to they might bring slightly different concerns. And so the Kubernetes connection, kind of that special one that you were talking about and showing a diagram of, that one is probably one of the more involved connections, because it actually does a deployment, and Kubernetes is kind of treated as a platform in this regard. Ultimately, Meshery is intended to connect to other platforms like public cloud providers, and in the very same way, deploy a mesh sync, go out and discover the cloud, all of its components, bring back that information, model those, model that cloud infrastructure in a similar way using the same logical object model. Okay, fair enough. Now, some of those connections over time, it looks like part of the proposal here is that these blue boxes, it looks like those are statuses, like a state of the connection itself. So if Meshery is connected to a single cluster, maybe at one point the administrator of that cluster wants to disconnect Meshery from that cluster. So there's probably, it looks like it would remove the operator. Okay, interesting. So it might uninstall the Meshery operator, but in this case, maybe it would still, this is probably a good question, is like, if you notice right next to the disconnected state, there's this white text, I guess, very concisely articulating what the behavior behind that state transition might be, specifically for Kubernetes. Do you want to talk about that, or maybe think aloud with others about that?
Yeah, sure. So there might be a possibility when we disconnect a cluster with Meshery that we might want to work with it later. So over here, the white text says, okay, remove operator, stay registered. So currently, we might not wish to work with Meshery, hence we disconnect it and remove the operator, which manages the cluster. But Meshery would still technically be aware of the cluster. And in that sense, it is still registered. And we might choose to deploy an operator in it later and bring it back to the connected state to work with it.
Yeah. Just to help bring others into the conversation, to help. So Raphael or Yash or anybody else on the call, why might it be a good idea to keep that cluster registered? It's like, wait, didn't the operator, the user, they just disconnected that cluster from Meshery server? Specifically, they said, they marked it as being disconnected. They told Meshery to stop managing it. So why would that connection, though? Why would Meshery keep a history? Why would that connection stay registered, even if Meshery isn't going to be interacting with that cluster? Yep. So Yash, those are great questions that you've got in the Slack or in the chat. There's a proposed set of states. You can see 4 of them right here in blue. Connected as a state, like the status of the connection is connected. The status of the connection is disconnected. The connection in this case being the term used to say that Meshery has connections, maybe a connection to GitHub or to Prometheus or to Grafana or to a Kubernetes cluster. Those are all connections. Each connection requires credentials or some form of credential, even if it's the absence of a credential. It's still, every connection would take a credential. And then, as Meshery goes to connect to things, maybe it's got a healthy connection. It's been connected for a while, but maybe in this case, for a Kubernetes cluster, maybe the Kubernetes cluster goes down or the network is disconnected. And so to be able to track the status of that and have Meshery intelligently understand that it is supposed to be connected to and speaking to the cluster, but it is actively not able to, is a healthy thing for Meshery to be cognizant of and to help manage the infrastructure in that way. So those are 4 of the proposed states right there. Another one is in teal, the discovered status, like a connection has been discovered, or the registered. Like in this case, I don't think what's proposed right here, I don't know that white register is necessarily proposed as a state, but Abdullah, there's a different slide that you were showing that it's more of a tabular format. It's more like a table. I think that says on the left column, here's the proposed states. so one of the proposed states is registered as like what's the state of that connection? Well, it's registered. And actually this description hopefully helps answer part of the question of like, wait, if the user disconnects the cluster, why would you leave that connection registered? Like, don't you want Meshery to be unaware of that cluster and to just leave it alone? And so this description here is saying, well, if a connection is in the registered state, it means that it's been administratively processed. Administratively meaning the user has, as an administrator, has taken a look at the connection and chosen to register it. So the user has administratively processed this, in this case for Kubernetes connection. But again, as we think through this, recognize that we're talking about any number of different connections. I tossed out like Prometheus and Grafana as two quick examples. A second part of that description says that it's online for use. We have to think through this a little. That seems about right. If Meshery was connected to a cluster and that cluster needs to go under maintenance, for example.
Yeah.
Yash, is that what your example was going to be?
So yeah, just this is something that is a bit ambiguous to me. Let's just say like I'm performing some operation, right? Like there are some nodes that needs to be replaced or something of that sort, or maybe the CNI is undergoing some changes, or there's some routine maintenance stuff that is happening. So what are the options available to me as a user, first of all? And second, like if I decide to disconnect and connect again, what would the process look like? Like that's something I just wanted to get much more clarity on. If that makes sense. Otherwise, I'll be happy to elaborate my question.
Yeah, no, it does. I was just saying in the chat that Abdullah, this is unfair to you, but intentionally just to help make you as quickly comfortable as possible with this area. Do you want to, did what Yash was asking make sense? Do you want to take a crack at that? If not, I'll tag in.
Can you repeat your question once?
Yeah. So like let's just say we mentioned that we have these falling states. So let's just say I'm going or performing some maintenance, right? Or let's just say there was some downtime, right? Even if it's not a maintenance state, and you are forced to do some maintenance. So how would let's just say I decide to disconnect it for a while and I wanted to connect again, or something or the other thing just happened, and maybe the connection got messed up because of the downtime or the maintenance that happened. It was not initiated from the user side. Maybe from the cluster itself it happened. How or what would be the recovery process? And like from the user's aspect, what would be the steps to ensure or actually record that, okay, these are the steps that have happened and I can reinitiate the connection, or if I don't need the connection, I can remove it safely. So that actually it's not affecting much of the cluster's health overall. Like just asking it from a scale point of view, because it would be fine like if it's running in a 50-100 nodes, but when talking about like at scale like 1,000 nodes, it would be much more difficult to maintain. So if that makes sense, otherwise to you also, if it makes sense, otherwise I'll be happy to give a much better example as well if the question is a bit ambiguous to you.
I did understand your question, but to be honest, I'm not really quite sure on how something like that would be handled. So
Fair.
yeah, Lee, you can take it out.
Yeah, Gaurav, I'll just note that Gaurav said time check. So that means we've got like 20 more seconds. Very briefly, yep, Yash, yep, great example. That's what the purpose, that's in some respects, hits at the core of the purpose of this effort, is to tool up people with, to be able to address something just like that and do it in bulk. So Meshery manages multiple Kubernetes clusters. actively. And yep, to give administrator users the ability to manually transition between these states, and for Meshery to treat those clusters appropriately with respect to the state. So in this case, you can see there's a maintenance state that's proposed. That's that specific one is for like a phase 2 of this particular effort. In a phase 1, an administrator could choose to disconnect if they wanted to. For Kubernetes clusters specifically, a disconnection also means to remove the operator, which is what we were highlighting a moment ago. It would remove the operator, but it would stay registered. And the question was like, well, why would it stay registered? And it's like, well, this is a great example because maybe it's just under maintenance and you want to re-enable it after maintenance. Of course, if it's just under maintenance, maybe you don't actually want to remove the operator, which would justify the need for a maintenance state. The primary reason in this case, if maintenance isn't supported initially, the primary reason for leaving the cluster registered is so that the next time Meshery were to read that kube config in which there's a valid context still pointing to that same cluster that just got disconnected, that Meshery would have a record of the fact that that cluster is already registered. It has been administratively moved to this state. It has been administratively disconnected. So do not redeploy the operator, because by default, Meshery is greedy in the way that it deploys operators when it sees an available context. There's good questions. There's a bunch more I'm sure that you would have around this. Like, well, what if, like, there's a bunch of other scenarios that this is a really healthy one for you to dig into.
Yeah, I have a few questions. But in the interest of time, let's move forward. But let's discuss this offline maybe once.
All right. Thanks, Abdullah. So next up we have 2 items from Meyazhagan. Meyazhagan would like to share.
Sure. What my screen was visible?
Nope, not yet.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, we can see.
Yeah. Okay, ma. I done like 2 pull requests. One for supporting the tail logs for the Kubernetes platform. Like when we are doing like meshery-ctl like system log, we will be like having the log will be ended. So to add the follow flag, I added the follow flag. Let me show the demo. In the Meshery names, I also added an Nginx pod so that we can able to test the log of that Nginx pod. Yeah, to be able to get the logs of the Nginx, and then every all the component also be able to get the logs. Yeah, can you able to hear me?
Yep, you are audible. So any feedback for Meyazhagan or questions?
Yeah, just as a quick recap. So Meyazhagan was just demonstrating a design that he had recently created. Is that right?
I like added the follow flag.
Oh yeah. Say it again.
Follow flag.
like following the logs instead of ending at after the log was finished.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. All right. Very good. Yeah. So you recently made an enhancement in Meshery-CTL to be able to support a -F, a follow of the Meshery-CTL system logs. Okay. Man, from what you're showing, this looks like it's working. And so that's quite nice. One gotcha that might occur that happens to people is that Meshery can be deployed to either Kubernetes, a Kubernetes cluster, so like inside of a cluster as a Kubernetes app, or it can be deployed on a Docker host or a Docker Swarm cluster, fine. And as such, when we run a command like meshery-ctl system logs, it is inherently cognizant of where Meshery is deployed, either Kubernetes or Docker. Do you know, have you taken that into account here as you've enhanced this command?
Already that part was already in the logs. I just started the follow flag and then okay.
Yeah, that makes sense. Or I totally believe you, by the way. I think by default with the way that, anyway, there's the follow flag works on both Docker-based deployments and Kubernetes-based.
Yeah, Docker by default it was using the follow flag. By default it was using the follow flag. I didn't say any backup adjustment. So I added for Kubernetes when the follow flag is enabled, like we will be fetching from the other pod and then we will be doing that. We will log it in the terminal.
Beautiful. And then for people that want to, stop the following, they do a Control-C.
Yeah. And then they also do specific thing also. Yeah, that also will be working. Okay, shall I move to the next one?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, and then the next one was when we are in the settings page, the title was in being updating, so that I added a fix for that also. Yeah, now we're able to see the title, and then in the pull request, I had some suggestion also. Like I will do that.
Sounds good. Thanks, Meyazhagan.
Yeah.
All right. So let's move to next item. That's by Ashish on fix failing cluster cleanup workflow. Ashish, would like to share? Cool.
Yeah. Okay, so there is this workflow that runs every 24 hours, and its job is to first reset the cluster, the playground cluster that we have, and then reboot the metal servers. I don't know whether we need the rebooting right now or the issue has been fixed, the issue due to which this thing was put in place. But I'll talk about the reset one. So here it says that it passes, but if you will look at the, it doesn't exit with status code 1. So that's why this step doesn't, basically this workflow doesn't fail, but it was trying to delete namespaces from a remote cluster, and the IP of the cluster is now private, so of course it can't access it. So I had added this. I had added the. I had modified the workflow to SSH into the VM. So we have two VMs. One runs the cluster, and the other one has Meshery, and both of them have the same kube config, so that the other one also has the kube config, so that Meshery can access that cluster via the kube config. So initially, I had instead of SSHing, instead of doing SSH into the cluster into the VM where the cluster is running, I added the IP of the first node where the Docker container, the Meshery is. So here, Pranav correctly pointed out that the IP should be changed to the second node. The only logic I had here was that I was trying to make the node where the cluster is running as like use and throw as possible. So least amount of configuration should go there, and most of the configuration should be on the other cluster, on the other VM, where we don't perform any kind of cleanups and all. I don't know if that logic is enough to justify this approach. Otherwise, I can change this IP to just point to the IP where the second VM where the actual cluster is. Both of them have the kube config, so it doesn't matter. It will work both ways. And if the one other advantage of having it on the first cluster where the Docker container where the Meshery is running is basically, if this workflow fails, basically if a kube config isn't available or something happens, then this workflow will fail. Again, I don't know whether having this kind of a pseudo test is along with this cleanup is like it's desirable or not. But yeah, if there are any I don't have a strong opinion here. I can change it to the other IP, and I think then we can go ahead with this PR. And there is another workflow that would be needed. So this script is responsible for doing the cleanup, and here I have added a to do that. This just does a basic namespace deletion right now. So the cluster scoped resources are not deleted, and so a lot of things like are still left in the cluster, which shouldn't be. So there should be another workflow so that whenever a change is made to this particular script, we SSH into the VM and then push this script so that we don't have to manually copy and paste this. We might discuss a part of this in tomorrow's CI call. So tomorrow we have CI call, which would be like 3 hours from this time. So make sure that you're there. And yeah, that's about this particular PR. If someone has any questions or suggestions here, you can ask me.
Pranav, any other thoughts on that? Or Uzair, I think you were maybe familiar with this deployment a little bit as well.
No, I was just thinking that since both the VMs have same kube config, then it's okay. Then we are SSHing in the first VM and not the second one. I was just thinking that why is that like we are running Kubernetes in both the VMs? Because when I SSH, I realized we're running Kubernetes in both the first VM as well as the second one. So
so on the first node, we shouldn't be having, so like is the kubelet running, or the kubelet should be down?
kubectl is available, and I'm able to see all the ports as well as other things.
Those are pointing to the kube config is there. The kube config points to the second node. If you will do systemctl status for kubelet, you will see that I'm pretty sure that you won't be seeing any kubelet there. So that basically the kube config is off the second node. It's available on the first node, but it's off the second node.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Got it.
Nice. Yeah. Hey, I'm of the same opinion that Ashish is, which is of little opinion about like which host gets SSH'd into. If we were to spend much more time there, it might be to try one, and if that doesn't work, try the other one. But it otherwise is inconsequential. And so that's a great point, Ashish, about one other thing that Ashish, as you're kind of curating the agenda for tomorrow's Meshery CI call, the build and release call, as you might talk about some of this tomorrow. One thing that we have a few workflows that are, well, it's noteworthy if they fail. It's like, ooh, if one of those failed, we better step in and go spend some time figuring out what's going on. And in the past, I know you've added a quick email action in a couple of places. I wonder if we don't have a few candidates for adding an email notification. I was thinking that one of them might be the Meshery Playground deployment workflow, which like I think there are probably a couple. One to the original like playground out in AKS, one to the current playground that you're talking about right now. That deployment, by the way, so the particular workflow that you were looking at is this nightly cleanup, wonderful, of the Kubernetes cluster to keep the sandbox clean. But I don't know that anyone has gone. So there's two thoughts here. One is if we can take a moment to assess where we might need an additional email notification on occasion, please bear that in mind. And maybe that's a topic for tomorrow. The other one, and maybe this is a topic for tomorrow as well, is I don't know that we've refreshed the deployment script. I know that we're running low on time. I do think that if I share the screen for a moment, it'll be helpful for everyone to have some additional context as to what Ashish is referring to. So Ashish, I don't know that we have refactored the playground deployment script in which we no longer need to do a rolling update of a Meshery deployment, inside of Kubernetes, but rather we just need to do a Docker pull and Docker bump, So
Pranav had added Watchtower. Is that working?
Oh, okay. Yeah, it probably is, like every 24 hours or whatever. It's, Pranav, you might have more specifics, but.
Yeah, actually, there is a watchtower, and I did reduce the polling time as well so that it updates little faster as compared to just updating in 24 hours. But like Uzair also had a thought that we should, instead of using watchtower, we should on each release we should pull the latest images and restart the containers so that we could have a healthy time we make a release instead of waiting for 6 hours to pull latest images.
And the reason being is that great. That hits on the head what I was. Ashish has got a great point. But maybe the justification for potentially being a bit more imperative with that deployment is you tend to forget about it 6 hours later, 12 hours later, and so as you're doing a release, within about that 30-minute time span, hopefully. Yeah, you're double check. Whoever's doing the release is like double checking on the health of the playground, and so. That doesn't mean that Watchtower couldn't still be there, or doesn't, But.
Okay, I'll add both items in the agenda for tomorrow.
Oh, nice.
All right, thanks, Ashish. So, Harkirat, you're up next.
Can you, Gaurav, please share your screen?
Yeah, sure.
So just PR was about when so we have mesh map when the user upload invalid pattern, if we upload a Kubernetes manifest or something around a Docker compose, which isn't which isn't aligned with our own design construct. So sometimes the designer used to get in a stuck state, means which we can't open that particular file because it's doesn't have that kind of field set. So this PR checks whether the pattern upload is valid or the pattern load is valid. So we wouldn't be ending up in the another situation like this. So this PR just add a checks that the pattern is valid. So then we move them to the next node. We throw back some error like, hey, this is not a valid pattern, or you're missing some services, or you're missing the traits, like kind of that. So we are double checking before uploading it, right? There's nothing. That's was mode, yeah.
Okay, you check the pattern or right now design. So what about applications now? Applications window, I mean in the applications upload window, someone can upload a design file as well.
Okay. But that okay. We do convert that, right? When a person upload in a mesh in the particular window, like the Kubernetes manifest or a Docker compose. I think we do convert that to a particular our own design construct, and maybe we can add a check there as well. I think I will like verify that whether the issue is there or not about uploading the particular design file in the application itself. So if it's throwback some error, I would look into the particular thing.
Okay. There is a ClickUp item like you can put your searches there, like whatever you find you can put there.
Sure. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Harkirat and Abhi. So moving on next, it's an item from me on extensions user-facing documentation initial draft. So I've created an initial draft PR for this. So it is still in a work in progress. It shows the basic layout of how we'll be representing all those stuffs. So we have Meshery documentation, but we were lacking extensions documentation since MeshMap is now being used by thousands of folks and users. So, and documentation is a must for that. So I've basically added some of the informations about like what MeshMap is and what are the things that we can show up over here. So the layout I've suggested in this PR is I'll be adding about how MeshMap works and its features. And this is just pointing out to the meshery.io built-in integration. And yeah, lots of more information will be adding in this particular documentation. So it will be a long running effort. So any thoughts or any insights over here? And yeah, that's how it looks in light mode.
Terrible work. It's horrible. I don't know. That's my own opinion. I just never get to say that. It's just unbelievably horrible. I don't know. Okay, bad joke. It is really helpful. So one of the things that Noreen is working on, or she's trying to work on, and she's blocked because I keep on not helping her, which is she's working on documenting another extension, the Meshery catalog. So if as a user, when you're inside of Meshery UI, you can go to this extensions area and switch on and switch off the Meshery catalog. And so I mention it because she has an ongoing effort to describe that extension as well. And I think earlier on the call, someone was saying that we need to describe the process by which designs are imported. Like someone else was just saying the same thing. Whoever that is, we need to connect Noreen and that person, because Lee has been failing them. Again, so Noreen, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, actually, I'm working on Playground, and I'm just thinking where I should place it. I'm sorry, a little bit noisy here. Yeah, I think I can maybe. Yeah, actually, I have made a page on Playground, but I have only put. I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah. He just woke up, so
Oh.
I think I'll send a message on Slack.
Yeah, no, sure. No. It wasn't half as loud as on the call as you think it was. So Noreen, it's in a non-sarcastic and sarcastic way. The answer to your question, I think, is prominently, or we should prominently highlight the fact that there is a Meshery playground that people can come try out the project. Great. So
I have added a feature, on the menu, on the sidebar, where it has table of contents. I have added a separate, what do you call, a tag.
Yeah.
So I think I had it in last meeting, but I couldn't manage to share with anyone. So maybe if you can have a look of that and give me feedback on that, that will be helpful.
Yeah, that seems prominent to me. Even we'll do another place that I think would work out quite well, potentially just in addition to that, potentially is when you go to docs.meshery.io, you're presented with an overview of a quick description of what the project is, and then kind of the high level table of contents, or like the sections of the docs, like potentially like right here. Like potentially that's such a significant resource. And for anyone trying to comprehend what this project does, one of the quicker ways to do that is to just go try it out, just go use it. So for those that are design inclined on the call, and there's a few of you that have been doing a lot of work, Avantika and Ritik, and a number of you have been doing a lot of work in that regard, you might consider think about how it is that when people come to the project, we have a demo system. Like, hey, is there a demo system of Meshery running that I can just go try it and see what it's like? Yeah, it's called the Meshery Playground. All right, we need to slap people in the face with that when they're reading the site. Think about how you might have some feedback for Noreen. So, and she's got a hyperlink to her draft, to her work in progress. Is anybody working on the Meshery catalog documentation then? I might have confused what Senali was potentially working on with what Noreen was. So Senali, are you working on catalog documentation by chance?
Not actually. I'm not working on the documentation part. Someone already working on that. I think Yash. He completed most of the part. I think need some feedback regarding his PR. I think.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. I'm just confusing you as the person who's actually creating the catalog. You've been doing some work on creating the catalog. So that's one. Okay. So Yash Sharma, number 2, or the other Yash Sharma, who's not on the call, I think, at the moment. He sounds like he's got an open draft. Senali, you might, given your work on the catalog, you might have some feedback for him. But we need some very specific instructions about the catalog. There's a couple of words that are being used that Avantika and Ritik and others and Avishkar and like Senali and a host of others have been looking at, is like there's some actions that people can take with content inside of the catalog, like to download, import, clone, some, to the extent that that's clear in any of your minds, you're well positioned to go comment on Yash Sharma, on the open PR. I'm sure somebody will drop a link to it. But the open PR for describing the catalog. Also, I think, but since we're like right at the end of the call, I don't know that we'll have enough time for another topic, except for maybe Antonette's, which is quite important. So I'll be quiet. In the meshery.io, when you go to catalog, there are hyperlinks that say, here's how you can create your own design, or here's the instructions for importing a design. I think it would be very healthy for Senali and Ritik and Avishkar and Avantika and others to go look at those two hyperlinks on the catalog page and review the instructions that are there. Yep, I'll stop there and say Antonette has quite an interesting topic and I think a call for help.
So my current topic is about the upgrading the open telemetry library and Meshery-adapter-library. And so at this point, the libraries have been updated. The certain parts of the tracing and there's another file. It's all been updated. But the only thing that I would like to see if everybody or look for volunteers to help to see if it works with a particular adapter. On each of the adapter, there is a section of code that has that's been commented some time ago, where you can import from the Meshery adapter library, and you can just start the tracing there. But if you're familiar with that, you can just make changes, uncomment it, and then go from there to import the local library after you clone the repository, and just make sure that you import the local package and then just go from there. So if anybody would like to contribute to help with that effort, and then just provide some feedback and make sure that it's actually working, and then in the meantime, any feedback that I do get, I can go ahead and make modifications to this particular PR. If not, then it would just be on a separate PR after.
Perfect. There's a link to there's a link to exactly what Antonette is referring to. Not only to the pull request, but also there's a link right now to instructions that she has offered inside of Slack. So she's made a change to the Meshery adapter library. That library is used in every single Meshery adapter. And the update that she's made has to deal with open telemetry dependencies and the way in which open telemetry is included in this Meshery adapter library. So the instructions for how to test that, which would be wonderful, are at the Slack link in the Zoom chat. Yeah. As we go to wrap up, I'm sure that we're about to do that. There's one topic that, well, we were going to discuss today. We've run out of time. It was the topic of relationships inside of MeshModel and instructions on how to go about identifying and defining relationships between all of these different components that Meshery manages. So those instructions are largely written up and ready to share and review and call in others for help. So we'll get an email out about that. Most very briefly, I know Yash, Tandon, and Tejas, both of you, I think, have recently looked at this area. And since we were able to communicate synchronously for another couple of minutes, did you have any questions or comments that we should quickly chat through?
So
Yes, a few actually. So definitely one thing that stood out to me was actually defining the cluster versus the tenant level relationship, and also a few other components seemed a bit ambiguous to me, particularly the one that I think we discussed earlier in the Argo relationships. Right? I think it could be more linear rather than uh, going in the in the way that we are. So that's just from my like a 9,000 feet overview exploration. Uh, Also, let me just open up my yeah. So regarding our storage claims or any storage related component as well, uh, the, the relationship is somewhat looking ambiguous to me because it is actually not defined. Let's just say if I'm defining a PV, or as you have actually highlighted very well. So as you have actually defined a PV over there, and that PV is end-to-end connected with that particular PVC, and then that PVC is maybe connected onto the stateful set or to the deployment, right? So when I'm actually adding that, it shows direct connections with the PV, rather it should show it with the PVC. That's how it sort of worked out for me. And what are the other components that we need to take into consideration for these particular ones? I need to dig deeper. And I also checked regarding these bindings that we actually talked about, right? So role binding and the cluster bindings, cluster role bindings part as well. So I think from my perspective, like, but again, it can be looking from a person who has context to what a binding is. It seems fair, but how would that look like from a person, let's just say, who's not quite experienced on what binding is? So yeah, that's something that we need to definitely discuss. I haven't explored the CNI or the networking aspects quite deeply. It's in my to do as of now. I was just going through a few things that stood out for me. I think there's a lot of discussion that we can do. I'm just briefing things out in for like in the interest of time. So yeah, any thoughts? Just wanted to know anything else that we can do.
Okay. I'll keep my mouth closed so that we don't go too much further over time. We have a lot of things to discuss. I think that you're pointing us in the right direction. Like there's one resource that was just created a little bit earlier this morning. It's an evolving issue template, because some of the discussion that you're referring to, well, we need to have discussion on each of these components and some particulars about how it should relate or shouldn't relate, and how that should be visualized. And so there's an issue template that hopefully is a start to how it is that we can articulate the steps to identifying these things, the steps to creating relationships. So there's a lot more info that's needed. I failed to get us more organized for a better discussion today, but we're close, and this helps. So I'll send this as well.
I got.
That's good. That's good though.
All right. So we are 6 minutes over. So we'll be discussing remaining items in next meeting. So thanks all for joining today's Meshery development meeting. You can catch the recording of this on Layer 5's YouTube channel. And if you got any questions, you can use Discuss forum to ask, or on Slack. So we'll meet next week, same time, same place. Bye all. Thanks for joining.
Wait, yeah. Sorry to interrupt. Wait. Actually, what's tomorrow?
Build and release call.
Newcomers call.
Newcomers. Hey, yeah. Oh, hey, shoot. Tomorrow's a big old day. So a couple of calls tomorrow, for those that didn't get their fill today. Well, there is, both of those calls are pretty great. And yep. So Ashish Mr. Tiwari will be hosting us tomorrow during the Meshery CI call. And do we know who's hosting the newcomers call tomorrow?
Yash Sharma. Meshmate Yash Sharma.
Yash Sharma, number 1. Okay. Thanks for hosting today, Gaurav. It's nice to see you.
Do press this big fat yellow button. It will sync all the meetings to your calendar. All right. Bye all. Thanks for joining.